And welcome to Face to Face on Bent TV, Channel 31. My name's David McCarthy. I'm the co-convener of the Victorian Gay and Lesbian Rights Lobby. And it's my great pleasure tonight to be joined by Jamie Gardiner. How are you, Jamie?
I'm well, thanks, David. And how are you?
Oh, can't complain. Can't complain. Now, you've been around for a while.
True.
Would you like to tell us how you started stirring the possum in gay law reform, where you started?
Well, David, it's always difficult to look back that far, but I think I'd have to say that I had a strong sense of justice from well before I realised that I was gay. And when I did realise that I was gay, which is whatever it is, 35 years ago, I thought, this is outrageous. How dare this society treat me like this and my friends? And that was when I was at Melbourne University, actually. But at that stage, I was still very nervous and not come out and all of that. Mm-hmm. But I went to do postgraduate work in London and decided to join up with the Campaign for Homosexual Equality and the Gay Liberation Front, which were both fairly, well, GLF was new and CHE had been going for a while. And the GLF office turned out to be 5 minutes walk from where I was living. And I sort of got involved with people there. I went to my first gay meeting at the All Saints Church Hall, Powis Gardens, and it was really quite frightening because there's 200 or 300 of those people, of which I, of course, was one, but hadn't quite integrated.
One of them?
I was one of them. And they were talking about fairly arcane things that I didn't understand at the time, but anyway. But I got involved. Then I discovered through some of the people I met that there was thinking about trying to get a gay student society going at the University of London. And I was at one college, University College, so I decided that rather than waiting around for that process, I really just start one up at University College, which I did. Turned out to be remarkably easy. And eventually we also got our one at the University of London. And in some ways, all of that sort of stuff just followed little bit by little bit, as it often happens in life. You just sort of think, well, but in order to get that, we decided, well, we really would like to have a decent sort of a standard orientation week the next year, and perhaps we should do a leaflet and a little promo. And how can we get the money to do that? Well, the Student Union, of course, or the National Union of Students. And, well, what would we need to do that? Perhaps if we banded together. Of course, printing was much more expensive in those pre-computer days. Perhaps if we get together with some people at other colleges or other universities, we might be able to sort of do a common leaflet and have it cheaper and get someone else to pay for it. Well, that one thing led to another, and by a year or so later, I was on the at the microphone at the annual conference of the National Union of Students, launching the motion to adopt a national gay rights policy, which had involved, over that year and a half, gradual expanding of the networks, and what was originally just trying to raise money for a joint leaflet and a little coming out threefold thing for students at the next year had become a national campaign, which was a campaign to make sure that every university and college in the United Kingdom had gay student society and that they were properly supported by their by the student union, and that it became a campaigning feature of all universities. And somewhat to my surprise, it succeeded. And not only did it succeed, it was still going when I visited there 10 or 15 years later.
Oh.
It was very pleasing. So that was 30 years ago. 30 years ago and a couple of months.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I came home, and also I should say, in doing that in a way that became a process of dealing with the issues of coming out and the issues that come together with that, which is things like counselling, a telephone helpline. I got involved with a boy I knew, became a rock star, Tom Robinson. He did a promo sound bit for the Gay Switchboard and in London, and we had a variety of things that develop on all of the sort of infrastructure that we also have here. We were developing then, just necessary. One of the things in England then was the need to get an equal age of consent, because although they'd had a partial decriminalisation of sex between men in 1967, which was only at that stage only 6 years earlier, it was done in a way which actually increased the harassment of gay men by the police.
Right.
So when I got home at the end of '74, I knew that, of course, that we still had the primitive laws even worse than the English had diminished in '67. And so I got involved, in fact, fairly early on with the people who were going to organise the National Union of Students here. Were organising what turned into the first National Homosexual Conference, which is almost exactly, thinking, August 1975. So that's whatever that is, 28 years ago. And around about that time, the Labor Party in Victoria, under a then Labor MP, State Labor MP Barry Jones, before he went federal, had a conference in which they had reaffirmed the Labor Party's principles on non-discrimination and had added sexual orientation, or however it was phrased in those days, to it. And round about August or September '75, Barry Jones introduced a private member's bill into the Victorian Parliament to decriminalise sex between men.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually teaching in Bendigo then, a university lecturer there, and I read the story about this. I thought, oh dear, he doesn't know what he's talking about. That's not exactly how to do it. So I just, at that stage, I wasn't really very much in contact. There was negligible organisation, of course. And so I got in touch with him and said, here's some suggestions on how you might do it. And at the same time, I met up with the then organisation with Carl Ryan-Garnham, the then president of Society 5, which associated in a sort of sense, you might almost say, was the predecessor of Also. Where did I meet Carl? I met Carl, he was handing out leaflets at the Beat at Como. And so we started chatting about politics, as one does.
Yes.
And so I got involved with him and other people, and they set up the Homosexual Law Reform Coalition in the beginning of '76. And we sort of adopted a campaign for equality. Equality was a fairly radical notion then. A lot of people only thought we should go as far as the lousy English law. But
some people think it is now.
Yes, quite. So that sort of one thing rolled into another, and we set up the coalition. We did quite a lot of work on thinking through what we really meant. The coalition was a coalition of the various groups that existed then, Society 5, and then the Gay Liberation in Melbourne, which was then by that stage really only running a telephone service, which ultimately connected in and became resurrected, phoenix from the ashes, as the Gay Switchboard after a hiatus. And the various church groups, the Metropolitan Community Church and others, and one or two social groups, most of which aren't around anymore.
Yeah.
And as I say, Society 5, which was the coy closet name for
Yes.
what was originally the Campaign Against Moral Persecution, because of course in those days, or at least before I went to England, the word was camp,
Yes.
not gay. That was an invention that came out of America really, with the Gay Liberation Front, or Gay Activist Alliance, which arose out of Stonewall in 1969. So all of those things melded together, and we started the campaign, which 5 years later was successful.
Well, we're going to a break shortly. We'll touch on some more current things when we come back from the break. But just briefly, Jamie, what do you think, for you, what's perhaps a standout high of the last 3 decades, and a standout low in terms of what's happened?
It's so difficult. There are lots of highs, working with lots of people to achieve each of the milestones. Obviously, winning the debate in 1980, or really winning it in 1979, which is when I knew that I had succeeded with the rest of the coalition, and Rob Thurley and I met with the Liberal Attorney General in 1979 and found that after 2 years of trying to persuade him, he'd gone from old-style English stuff to our model of equality. So that was a great high, and it was a bit of a secret one because it was one of those private meetings. And it took a year for him to persuade his party to do it, mind you. So that was a high. Actually, the night, or a week before Christmas in 1980, when the bill finally went through, and that was really exciting. And I think the next big high was the same sort of thing when the Relationships Act went through in 2001, which was really the next big milestone after that. I suppose obviously adding sexual orientation to the Equal Opportunity Act was another one.
Yep.
But what were the lows? Well, the lows were each of the times we were defeated and had to regroup and do it again. John Cain and his Labor government tried to put up equal opportunity reform for us in May 1983, and that was knocked out by the Liberals in the upper house. So that was a low. And he tried twice more.
I need you to hold that thought because we're going to have to go to a break. We'll come back with the lows after the break. I'm Dave McCarthy. You're watching Face to Face, Bent TV, Channel 31. Back soon. Face to Face on Bent TV. My name's Dave McCarthy. I'm the co-convener, Victorian Gay and Lesbian Rights Lobby. This evening we're joined by Jamie Gardiner. Now, before the break, Jamie, we were talking about highs, and we touched on those. The lows.
I guess, David, the lows are how long everything takes. Even when we've had successes, it takes so long to get everything to happen. I was thinking, when one of the highs, in fact, was when I first succeeded in persuading a federal politician to put gay rights for lesbians and gay men in the campaign process, when Gareth Evans agreed in 1983 to make a strong commitment to reform and anti-discrimination, which he did, was said. And they did, in fact, over the years from 83 up to 96. There was one or two things every year, but each of them was always slow, and they were always resisted vigorously by the opposition or by the right faction in the Labor Party. And most of that time, in fact all of that time, Labor didn't control the Senate. So every obvious human rights progress that we absolutely needed and deserved and was so right, everything went so slowly. And so, but then the biggest disappointment was, of course, that in spite of things happening, the immigration couples decision in 1985, the Tasmanian law reform in 1994, all of those things, they all happened slowly one after the other. The biggest disappointment was, of course, the coming into office of the Howard government with its vehement reactionary stance, which was really, oh God, where are we going?
Which they
now?
update from time to time, every opportunity they do.
Well, it keeps
in
getting worse,
regulation.
and we have a look at that awful business with the Heffernan stuff and the attacks on Michael Kirby. Well, that awful man in the Senate had a brief moment in the sin bin, but the fact is that he almost immediately got back into, so that there was no real contrition, there was no apology.
No.
So those are some of the disappointments.
Okay, now a particular thing that I'm very passionate about is bullying in schools. It's a huge problem. We don't... everyone's entitled to an education, everyone's entitled under the law to be treated the same, yet in schools it doesn't really seem to apply. We obviously have the church schools where there's the Equal Opportunity Act comes into play there as well, but how do we effectively tackle homophobic bullying at schools, do you think, Jamie?
Well, David, I think the schools, our own experiences and experiences of young queer kids going through school right now are very, very important, as you say. In Victoria, the Equal Opportunity Act says that in all schools, religious and non-religious and state, that education must be delivered in a way that is not discriminatory on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. There's no ifs, no buts. So what's happening in schools, whether it's bullying, whether it's name-calling, whether it's silencing and obliteration, whether it's the failure to validate, all of those things harm both physically and emotionally queer kids, and they're all unlawful. The experience of in almost every school, I know one or two where it may not be true, the experience of lesbian girls and gay boys and transgender kids in almost every school constitutes unlawful discrimination. And why is nothing happening? Yes, I guess the question you're answering. Well, what can we do about it as a community? Well, I think why is it happening is that, of course, it's the most vulnerable time.
Yep.
The kids who are being discriminated against may, like I at their age, may not even really have sorted out where they stand. They haven't told mum and dad, or they have and they've had problems. And the last thing on their minds when they're trying to get themselves through, whether it's year 10 or year 12 or whatever, is trying to increase their visibility.
Yes.
When of course bullying is a way of silencing people. So the Equal Opportunity Act doesn't really function very well for that sort of entrenched systemic discrimination. So we as a community have to work with the Education Department and the other school systems to say, you have an obligation to give a discrimination-free education, not only no bullying, which is obvious, but no other discrimination. And if you have a look at how the curriculum is delivered, how we are written out of so many areas of society, I think almost every area of curriculum, not only health and human relations or physical stuff, not only English or drama, but mathematics and physics and chemistry. I bet we could find ways in every single curriculum area where the experience of lesbians and gay men is written out, where people are not treated fairly. So I think we need to put together that stuff in a way that will carry the weight. The lobby, for example, has, and its predecessors have produced 2 reports in the last 10 years on discrimination, which were enormously influential because they collected people's real experience.
Yep.
And I think that one of the things we should do is be getting people's experiences down. And all of us went to school, and certainly those who went to school quite recently could probably still take action under the Equal Opportunity Act if they wanted to. There's a bit of a time limit, but not totally rigid. And certainly those who are now in university or TAFE and are quite recently out of school might still look back and say, and it's not just about me, it's about those who are there behind. In fact,
Yes,
it's
that
entirely
follow.
about those who are there. I've talked, you've talked in the last year or so to quite a few groups of next generation Q, next generation, various projects which are working often through local councils with school kids, gay, lesbian, transgender, queer, whatever, where depending on whether I go to one suburb or another, and I've gone to 4 of these groups, and I've also spoken at the conference of the Safe in Schools, Safe Same-Sex Attracted Friendly Environments in Schools. So there's lots of stuff happening, but it's uncoordinated, and it is not statewide, and so there's good stuff. There are schools that are doing good stuff. There are municipal councils that are running good programs for queer kids. But you listen to their stories and there's bullying and the teachers don't stand up for them. There's that awful old stuff about, well, if you just sort of didn't make yourself so obvious, it wouldn't happen.
It's laughable, isn't it?
Hello? You know, we all have human rights. And not only do we have human rights, we have legal rights. And those kids have a legal right to a non-discriminatory education. And we as a community have to work together to make sure that the custodians of education, the minister, the department, the Catholic Education Office, the school principals, take their obligations seriously. They are serious obligations, they're legal obligations, and I think we can work together to help them to do it. Not a matter of big stick.
No.
It's a matter of saying, okay, wake up to yourselves. You've got obligations, you've got to look after these kids, and we'd like to help you. We'd like to help you by waking you up with some stories, and we'd like to help you by showing you that there are schools that have done it right, are doing it right, and you can all learn from it, but you've got to take it seriously. It's very important.
Well, I think that, just before we close, I mean, it's certainly something that, the lobby's been thinking of and we're going to spend some time on. I lay the blame really at the feet of the Education Department, in that they haven't been vigilant in this. It has been brought to their attention before, but we'll raise it with them again, and we'll raise it with the Minister and see where we go. Just one final question quickly, Jamie. The issue of the recent ruling in Canada on same-sex marriage.
Well, isn't that fascinating? In Canada they have effectively a Charter of Rights. Human rights are part of the Constitution of Canada. They ought to be here, but they're not. And of course that means that discrimination of the sort that exists in our marriage laws is unlawful because it's unconstitutional, because it's unequal. And the Canadian courts have now held effectively that the principle of law that said that men and men can't marry or women and women can't marry is discriminatory and wrong, and it's been scrubbed out. And the Canadian federal government has said, yeah, okay, we knew this was coming, we will work together to look at all of the ramifications and get it right. Just like the Brax government did here with the Relationships Act.
With that stuff,
We need the same sort of stuff to happen federally. And not everyone wants to get married, but there's no reason why we shouldn't be allowed to.
Okay. Well, it's a subject for another program. Thank you, Jamie, for your time tonight, and also thank you for all the work you've done over many, many years for our community. It's a very, very important role Jamie's played, and I, for one, want to thank him for it. You're watching Face to Face on Bent TV. My name's Dave McCarthy, and thank you for watching. Bye for now.